Hello there. Introduction. First track here. Starting this review right here, I guess, right into the music. So what have we got here? A wave of wind channeled through the headphones and some gentle chiming sounds alongside it, like a doorbell or maybe some kind of alarm system at the local train station. And behind it, a rising drone of a siren perhaps, maybe anyway, before it is then accompanied by church bells that are resonating in that very still air itself. And from that, you've just got this vision. A Gentaro stood in the middle of a lonely street, an intersection, in the middle of nowhere in 80s Japan perhaps, recording away this little medley of sounds occurring all around him. This is a very peculiar opener, at least in regards to the Gerogerigegege, setting things off in a very rather gentle way that is hardly suggesting the monstrosity of noise that is embedded in the rest of this album. Of course, a testament to Gentaro's constant trickery and deception, the way he utilises sounds in so many fascinating ways to just lull us listeners into very unsuspecting experiences. And as this gentle recording is all occurring, we kind of wonder, what are we letting ourselves in for here? Where will this album end up going once it truly starts, following this rather starkly cold and lonely opener? Well, of course, it all undoubtedly strays in towards classic Gerogerigegege territory, when we're launched into the next track of Violent Onani. A build-up of noise, distortion and pure squealing feedback before all becomes a cataclysmic storm of pure nonsensical noise. And here we can begin this episode properly. So yes, hello there, welcome to Weird Music on the Glumburger channel. The strange music show that's been diving into different albums each and every week, right? So, according to my notes, it's actually been nearly 2 years since we returned to the world of the Gerogerigegege. It was in our last video, that long time ago, we actually looked at Descrescendo, a really fascinating album within the discography of the band, a delightful experimental album, gentle sort of steel drum type things, isn't it? It's essentially a far cry away from the overloading noise that we're very used to when it comes to this discography of music. But in today's episode, as a way of reintroducing the band back to the channel, we're going to go right back to the late 80s with a look at what is probably one of my favourites within the band's discography, especially in regards to the assaulting noise era of the band. So yes, today I present Senzuri Champion by the Gerogerigegege. So, we know who this band is, or you should do if you've watched the previous episodes. If not, a little bit here then. The ultra shit band spearheaded by Juntaro Yamanouchi, a band that is scant with sexual and scatological aesthetics across a very varied discography of music. And so in today's episode, we are reviewing Senzuri Champion, which I think is supposed to be the band's second album, released all the way back in 1987 on Juntaro's Vis-a-Vis Audio Art as what I think was meant to be its first official release. And this is a complete monster of a recording, just pure unfiltered noise that overwhelms and overloads. And this album, like so many albums by the Gerogerigegege, it's one shrouded with its own level of mystery and intrigue, right? As the first official release, maybe, who really knows? It's actually very hard to tell these things, isn't it? But as probably what is the first official release, this album was apparently printed on vinyl with 1,000 copies. However, prices currently on Discogs go for over $600 at the moment. So we wonder whether, is this even true? 1,000 copies, and yet one of the most difficult albums to get a hold of, right? I shrug my shoulders because this level of mischievousness is just classic Juntaro, isn't it? The dude is just a complete troll when it comes to anything involved with this band. In particular though, I am clueless when it comes to this particular album, Senzuri Champion. in regards to this one, this original version released in 1987, there's no actual real idea of who's on this thing, with the only mention to other people being a list of thank yous on the physical release. Maybe collaborators, but who actually knows? But regardless, this is a very odd release that doesn't answer any questions, and instead it just exists as exactly as what it is and nothing more. And as well, in an attempt to bring this back to reviewing this particular album, when it comes to the music, it is just pure, unrelenting noise and overwhelming stuff. And so yeah, in regards to Violent Onani, which is where I feel the album truly begins, you've just got this barrage of constantly occurring sounds, almost droning away incessantly, screeching with such horrible levels of high-pitched feedback that sting your ears as it all occurs. And this one is a never-ending onslaught, it feels, just pure unfiltered noise rushing past like life on fast-forward motion, stabbing and assaulting you with each and every moment that passes and sending you into this frenzied panic attack. It is, well, undoubtedly horrible music. Horrible, discordant screeches of whining noise and feedback that has very few redeeming qualities, and yet I think this might be one of my favourites from the whole of the Gerogerigegege, as mentioned. What fascinates me though is just how unrelenting the whole experience is. Like, once you get to the second track, everything is just pushed into 12th gear, rushing along so quickly and wildly that it becomes impossible to discern any details within that maelstrom of growing noise and feedback from all the instruments. It's so weird, but with the constant barrage that is always occurring, it kind of feels like when I'm listening to it, my mind is desperately trying to tune it all back out, just letting it fall back into the recesses of my own senses, only to be pulled back in by the briefest semblance of something, potentially tangible, I'm going to say. Like, as it's all occurring, it feels like there's brief moments of screaming, like a human voice hidden deep within the confines of all of that constantly building noise. And it makes for such a very weird experience as a result, as the more daring listeners of us able to withstand the sonic torture of the composition may undoubtedly force themselves further into this whole album to see what secrets lie in amongst all that noise and chaos. But I feel like when it comes to something like this though, the way it all sounds, our senses are just being tricked and played upon for the most part. Because any brief occurrence of something embedded within the layers, like, you wonder if it's even occurred at all. If it was even there, as it seemed to only exist for only the briefest of moments. Blink, and instantly disappeared, leaving behind the complete wreckage of all the noise in its unholy destruction. It is such a harsh, bombarding experience that's so ugly and horrible and so unpleasant in every aspect, yet something so bizarrely fascinating about the whole thing too. Like, my goodness, just to further talk about this one, is a fascinating yet horrible album in so many respects. Like, I'm quite fascinated by the fact that it opens up so serenely with the introduction, featuring those field recordings of wherever in Japan it was sourced from, only to then devolve into the classic freeform noise experience that is so expected of the Gerogerigegege. Like, it's very weird, and the harshness of the noise itself, it seems to border on those Merzbow levels of pure unfiltered noise, just shocking the senses and pummeling you as it all occurs. But of course, something awfully fascinating about it as well, right? There's just this attitude that comes across on this album of absolutely no fucks being given. No care for the results of all their experimentation and noise, and instead, create it because you can, right? To be fair, I have always gotten this impression from a lot of the earlier works of the Gerogerigegege, especially in the pure noise era though, where there was this attitude of just pushing it all as far as it can go without giving a damn to the audience whatsoever. But of course, why should the band care for the audience? Such is the point of this ultra shit noise music. Just make a barrage of noise because it's what you want to do. And it fascinates me about this weird branch of noise music, why I find it so interesting to dive into. Like, to try discuss it, part of me wonders about the sort of oddly cathartic level of release one experiences when indulging in creating such a monumental racket. Like, I'm very impressed that whoever is on this recording, and whoever indeed, there's no real indication except for Jintaro Yamanuchi themselves, of course, but whoever engaged with creating this noise was able to somehow withstand that maelstrom, able to withstand the brutality of the noise throughout the entirety of it all, which is fascinating to me. Something kind of cool about it, even though it's not something that would make a lot of sense to people, but then again, neither with music like this. But I feel like that's part of the context and purpose, is the actual act of creating it though. the process of just indulging in this level of noise for 10 minutes. What a thing to be a part of, and something, that has resulted in such an ugly, horrible experience. Like, something amazing about it, no doubt. To try quickly summarise, though, I think this is a very phenomenal track within the confines of horrible, unlistenable music. Like, the experience is so overwhelming and something that I can only stomach upon on very brief occasions. And yes, it is one of my favourite albums from the band, though. Like, I don't know, something about the horrible discordance of it all makes it just stand out nicely in regards to the likes of Tokyo Anal Dynamite. More of an indulgence of pure noise than a sort of sort of vague resemblances to rock formalities. It is music that is so caustic, which in and of itself is a truly brilliant thing. However, there's more to it than just this second track, though. To discuss the album further, we get our next track of Rock and Roll, Dutch Wife ABC. And yeah, this one starts off disgustingly. A horrible audio sample of some guy beating off, I'm assuming. Lovely. Classic Gerogerigegege, isn't it? Very gross and makes me very uncomfortable, but then you get a squeal of high-pitched feedback and some drums in the background of it all. Now, I don't know if there were drums in the previous track. There probably was, but when I was reviewing it, I couldn't hear it at all. Here, though, the actual band sounds much more tangible, launching into this weirdly discordant and screechy rock number that sounds like it was recorded in the back of some tiny dilapidated shack somewhere. But even so, there's a structure of some sorts within this one, offset by the horrible screeching which really hurts the ears to experience. But in any case, the drums taper off to let a vocal come in, and then it launches into the kind of frenetically paced dirge of the likes of anything from Tokyo Anal Dynamite. Just a lot longer here. A kind of frantic performance against a backdrop of horrible instrumentals. And there's lots of screaming, lots of discordance, as though Yamanouchi is trying to exorcise those demons from deep within him. A truly unrelenting experience that is horrible to listen to, but fascinating in its presentation of something just disgusting, no doubt. Like, this one indeed does gross me out, especially with the opening. Like, it just really creeps me out and makes me uncomfortable. But when it comes to the actual composition itself, as horrible and discordant and chaotic and screechy the whole thing is, I find it very weirdly enjoyable in this sort of Gerogerigegege context. I guess it's because everything is so horribly, everything else is so normally horrible and discordant that anything that remotely strays away from that with something more tangible, whatever tangible may be in these contexts, it makes it a bit more enjoyable. Maybe anyway. I feel like it's because it's all beating down upon you so much that you feel grateful for anything that's just a little bit less awful, even though this one is so horribly loud, discordant, chaotic, and full of nonsensical screaming that it just makes you uncomfortable. But with the whole band being present, and this very vague sense of rock embedded within all that noise, it makes it just marginally better. But in this grand scheme of things, it's irrelevant, because the whole band is going for shit and nothing more with these songs, right? Let's move along though. Our next track of Anal Beethoven. Gross name for a track, but there's a lot of grossness there, but this one I think is very amusing. So this one opens up with a vocal that you can't hear, and then drums that fill the left channel, and then the right, and then more muffled vocals before the noise just builds up and up. And then this one becomes a really weird one to experience indeed. Like, I'll be honest, I only noticed this as a result of really sitting down and paying attention to what I was listening to when writing these very words. And I realised that you've actually got two, what feels like two different versions of the same track occurring in each earphone, both slightly out of sync with each other, which creates this very bewildering experience that continues the assault that the whole album's been offering. Like, the drums just pound away, pushing along this barrage of distorted noise and feedback, whilst alongside it there's nothing else really going on except the growing maelstrom of cataclysmic noise. And I find it to be such a disorientating experience, like one that is a real struggle to get through as a result of the desynchronized nature of both channels on the track. And it fascinates me as it's taken something that's super horrible and somehow made it even worse as a result of this oddly experimental idea. Like, it definitely feels intentional, as it occurs for the entire duration of the song, and it's interesting, but it makes it more uncomfortable than it has any need to be. Now, to be fair, there is something oddly fascinating that comes from listening to a noise track that's presented in this way. The music itself is just a sonic barrage, constantly overloading and overwhelming, which has no tangible features to hang on to as it's all occurring. It just blasts by regardless of your ability to keep up. But weirdly enough, as your brain starts to filter it all out and let it all occur, it becomes more of a tangible experience. Like the desynchronization is still present, with things seemingly occurring in the left channel before ending up in the right, but the more that all occurs and the more you're not paying attention to it, the easier that is to manage and listen to. Almost like they phase in out of one another, creating this odd flow of constantly occurring noise. And as a result, I think this has to be one of the more fascinating tracks on this album. Another unrelenting experience that is not an easy listen in any way, but one that hides this little secrets in terms of its presentation, which results in such an oddly unique listening experience. Like, it doesn't make the track any less ugly, but it does make it more interesting to hear, even though it's been done as a result of Yamanuchi's sense of humour, I'm going to say. Because, of course, it would be funny to do something along the lines of this. Create an overloading and overwhelming noise excursion, and then shift phase it in both of the channels, right? Like, I can't help but think of Juntara as thinking that this would be really funny to do, which of course seems to be most of the motivation when it comes to his weird music. But regardless of his intention, I think it's awesome and a weird highlight of this horrible album. Moving along, we get to the next track of I'm Herpes, Yes I Am. Jesus Christ. The names of these tracks just seem to get worse and worse, I have to say. But yeah, this one, it kind of lets the noise fade in from the silence, so bizarrely structured in this composition. Like, it seems to all come in from these odd occurring bursts, utilising a lot of silence against this backdrop of noise, of people all talking over one another, whilst this sort of beat is provided by this Morse code of static and noise, essentially. It's another overwhelming experience, but it's one that's strayed a little bit away from what we've had on the previous tracks in favour of something way more experimental. As a result of just sort of having this song stop-starting thing of letting the sound just go like that, up and in, with this sort of backdrop of all that noise, all the vocals. It's weirdly enough to me, as a result of the voices so notably present on this one, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Cherries by Stable, an album we reviewed some time ago, I want to say. Though here, way less structured and way more discordant in terms of its sound and presentation. It is a truly bewildering experience that really warps my brain when I hear it, trying desperately to hang on to the semblance of reality in the form of those conversations that are being held in the audio samples, but thrown off by the mixing of all these elements thrown together with such wild abandon. Like, following the experimentation of the last track, it actually delights me in this very weird little way. Like, within the confines of noise, Yamanuchi is experimenting with some very neat ideas. Nothing resulting in anything arguably worth listening to, which is a bit cruel to say, but definitely interesting enough to the likes of someone like me. Like, I like it when people just do weird shit. And this album just indulges in pure sonic noise, being so caustic and uncomfortable, and yet in amongst it finds some avenues to some really, really weird shit, which makes it fascinating as a result. Not an easy one to listen to, but really rewarding for weird reasons. However, moving along, we get to Absolute Rape. I don't like the name of this track. That makes me feel icky. But yes, the next track, This one brings us right back to weird oscillations of feedback and noise, whirling away with this distorted backdrop of noise that results in something completely intangible. It is another horrible recording that reminds me a little bit of the Merge by Swans, since listening to Birthing a lot. Although I did hear this track first a long time ago, way before Birthing ever came out. But somehow any memory I had of this particular track is just not there in my head. I've completely forgotten how the entire thing sounds. And now my brain latches onto the Merge by Swans as this sort of tangible form of recognition. Regardless though, another caustic cataclysmic overload of pure noise and distortion. Another horrible, ugly experience that seems to really churn around in your belly as it's all occurring. I find it, weirdly enough, find the effects of this one to be physically sickening for some reasons. Like, it just seems to embed itself deep within the bowels of my gut as it's occurring, just shifting and distorting it in such uncomfortable ways. Classic Gerogerigegege, right? Just creating uncomfortable sonic experiences that never sit still. And instead it just forces their experiences upon you as a listener, pushing you through the maelstrom of noise because it's oddly funny to do so. Maybe anyway. But let's move along. We get to our final track of Senzuri Champion. So yes, this one opens up with a very weird sample of two people seemingly fucking. Maybe some nice homoerotic gay sex, I'm going to say, which is offset by this weird 4x4 beat from the drums. That is without doubt one of the more structured things we've had on this entire album the entire time we've been here. It seems to be what we get to close off this whole thing. Just fucking sex noises and grunting and groaning from these. It sounds like two dudes, to be fair, which is grand and cool, but I don't want to hear it. It makes me icky. I don't want to hear anybody having sex, to be fair. It just feels really icky and gross. But it feels like, especially with the drum beat, you're getting a weird semblance of an actual song being formed from the rest of the band hidden behind all of this. But maybe not, because it's actually very hard to tell. It feels like it's all developing. Like as it all develops, there is something from the guitars there, and it even feels like what sounds like a piano entering the fold at one point. But the composition is dominated so much by the sounds of fucking that it becomes impossible to ignore it, though. So never mind the discordant jazzy piano, never mind the passing of vehicles in the background, never mind the drums or even the guitars that's sort of trying to build up noise behind it. All you can really pay attention to is just the weird fucky sounds. I'll be honest, I hate it. It makes me really uncomfortable. But that's the point, right? Yamanouchi wants to do everything in his power to make people feel uncomfortable, and he has easily done so for myself with this very final recording. Too much for the likes of me to even deal with. But then again, we all just have our personal hang-ups, don't we? Things we struggle to handle. Maybe I'm just a prude, who knows, but I just find when it comes to sex in music, it just makes me uncomfortable. But I think that's kind of funny, isn't it? To be fair though, it is a really weirdly interesting way to end this entire album without a doubt, and a bit of a precursor for what they would do on Showa, which is just an entire album just the fucking basically. Not something I ever want to review. I don't think I'm ever going to get around to it at any point because it's just makes me too uncomfortable, but whatever. So, to try summarise, I'll be honest, I actually have no memory of this half the elements on this album featured on here. Like, when I first checked out the Gerogerigegege many years ago, I always thought this, I checked out this particular album and I always found it to be one of my favourites, but the truth was I never knew exactly why when I was approaching it again to review it for. And the further truth is that this is an album that actually makes me so uncomfortable and really gets under my skin at times. So yeah, having dived into this video, I've learned way more about it than I ever knew. Pure unfiltered noise album that plays so many different tricks and jokes on all different kinds of listeners, even those who are comfortable within the confines of assaulting noise, it feels. Like, as a result, it's actually, in terms of the songs, it's very fascinatingly structured, with the softness of the introduction, 10 minutes of blasting noise that hide many secrets in the maelstrom, before moving on to some very experimental tracks here and there for the rest of the album. And with Yamanouchi instead opting to do some really wild and creative things, including the sounds of people getting off and fucking each other, right? Classic, isn't it? But it surprises me so much that I couldn't even remember such a thing happening when I first heard this album many years ago. Of course, I often find when reviewing music for this show, especially when returning to albums that I'd heard years and years ago, there's often a lot of elements that did fly over my head on those first listens, especially when it comes to albums where you're bombarded by noise. Like, I think all of the sounds just get filtered right into the background of my mind when I first heard it, refusing to take in any of those details as they did all occur, and instead my brain just sort of making stuff up, it feels. I think there's something kind of funny about it, and I think a joke has been a bit played on me as a result, which is kind of funny. But weirdly so, even as uncomfortable and caustic as I find the whole thing, this is still one of my favourites, I think. Especially from that earlier noise era of the band. Like, somehow Yamanouchi managed to play so many tricks on us across the course of this album, all embedded within pure noise, and I can really appreciate that. Even though I am grossed out and made to feel very uncomfortable, I really appreciate it and find it very cool, even though there's a weirdly funny joke being played on myself. But I think it's cool for existing exactly what it is, and to be fair, I do adore the experimentation here across the very different tracks, Especially when it comes to the likes of Anal Beethoven and its weird mixing of the two channels. Like, weirdly, if you just press play and launch into the whole thing, you don't seem to notice it though. Or at least, I don't. But only because I was sat down ready to listen to it did I notice this slightly odd occurrence. And for myself, it makes it all the more fascinating experience, Like, I don't know about you watching, but it seems for me, this is rather neat in its own way. Experimentation within noise music. Very cool stuff, although it doesn't make it any easier to listen to. It makes it more interesting and more rewarding as a result. An album hiding a multitude of secrets in amongst the most horrible of noise. And so yeah, with that I think we will come to the end of our episode of Weird Music. Really glad and also apologetic for returning to the world of Gerogerigegege. I'm sorry it has been so long. A lot of people do seem to want a few more videos on this band, and I'm sorry I haven't been doing it as much as I should, but here we are discussing them again. And so yeah, I'll try to do more in the future. For some reason, I felt drawn to discussing Senzuri Champion, and I'm glad I've done so, because although it was incredibly gross and uncomfortable, it still fascinates me within the band's wider discography. One that really surprises me, even though I'm so grossed out. Very neat stuff. So yeah, if you made it this far, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. Don't know when we'll return to the Gerogerigegege in the future. At some point, maybe if the wheel selects some of the videos that are albums that are chosen on that one, we might review it then. But I might cover some at some point anyway. But who knows? Who knows? Hopefully not in 2 years though, right? We'll see though. With that, I wish you all the best. Take care and bye bye for now. Bye bye.